Football's golden oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster. Football in Brazil. Football came to Pau Grande in 1908 when the first English visitors brought balls, taught the locals how to play and founded the sport club Pau Grande. It was a sport for everyone, no fences around the pitch and no one had to pay to watch the matches. The players were amateurs and would continue to be long after professional football was introduced to Brazil in 1933. Everything in Pau Grande belonged to the factory, which built houses and gave them rent-free to their 1,200 workers. It laid roads and put in water, electricity and sewage systems. It built schools and health centres. Medicine was free at the chemist, as was the milk, the school dinners, and one of the bosses was Amaro, father of Garrincha. Amaro had a horse named Champion after Jim Nortrist's famous steed, but when he went out he didn't hunt dragons. Amaro's target was altogether different. He went after women, married or single. To Amaro they were all comadres, which means mother of one's godchild, and back then it also meant a bit on the side. Amaro is believed to have fathered at least 25 children, and his son Garrincha simply followed in his father's footsteps. Amaro enjoyed the pick of the women of Pau Grande. He wasn't the slightest bit choosy and made no distinction because of colour, looks or age. When Garrincha was born in 1933, Amaro was 36 years old, and the massive quantities of alcohol eventually took their toll. By the time he was 60, the once formidable Amaro walked the streets naked and was impotent. Bit by bit, he disappeared, but in his place came someone who would surpass him in everything he had been good at, and whose star contained its own brilliance. His name on all official documents was Manuel dos Santos. Where were Garrincha's roots? The Fulmeo of Brazil number around 5,000. They are part of the South American indigenous people within the Latin Caribbean Americans affinity bloc. This people group is only found in Brazil. Their primary language is Fulmeo. Garrincha, the little bird. Manuel Francisco dos Santos, or Garrincha, would play most of his career for Botafogo, scoring 84 goals in 238 games, and he had three nicknames. Little Bird because as a young man his sister Rosa compared him to a small bird like a wren. His other two names were People's Joy and the Bent-Legged Angel, and he was said to be like Tom Finney, Stan Matthews and Charlie Chaplin rolled into one. As a young boy he was certified by doctors as a cripple because his right leg was almost 3 inches shorter than his left, which was a peculiar physical trait of the Fulmeo Indians, who, like most Indian groups, live near Brazil's urban coastal strip. It is said that in Brazil he wasn't worshipped only by Botafogo supporters, but the entire population of Brazil. Photo shows him in his beloved Botafogo shirt, black and white stripes. Triumph and tragedy of Brazil's little bird. Garrincha was the unlikeliest of footballers, with a right leg that turned inwards and a left that turned out. He looked as if he could barely walk, but with the ball at his feet, he had the poise of an angel. He played for the love of the game, uninterested in money, ignoring tactical advice, and he was as wild off the pitch as he was mesmerising on it. Mischievous, combination of a nation. Their mouth-watering combination of soccer and samba made them the toast of 1960s Rio. But by the age of 49, Garrincha was dead, destroyed by the excesses that made him so compelling. The World Cup finals, Sweden 1958, Brazil versus the fearsome USSR. In the opening 3 minutes, the greatest 3 minutes in the history of football, one man wrote himself into the record books alongside the game's greatest players, men like Pelé, Di Stefano and Puskás. His name was Manuel Francisco de Santos, the little bird. Brazil went on to win the Jules Rimet Trophy, and in Garrincha, a star was born. Brazil's footballing hero. The first photo shows his right leg bending in and the left leg bending out. The second photo shows the stadium that bears his name, Mané National Stadium. He never grew up. This photograph explains who and what Garrincha was, a small child who never grew up. After games with Botafogo, he would return to his birthplace, Pau Grande, and play with his mates and the children. I have seen photographs of Bobby Charlton and Wilf Mannion playing with kids in the back alleys of Middlesbrough and Ashington, but not after a match. Imagine Matthews, Finney, Greaves, Charlton, Lofthouse and Lawton getting change after a game and playing with the street kids where they live. Never in this world. Early days. Manuel Francisco de Santos was born on October 28, 1933 and died on January 20, 1983. Nicknamed Mané Garrincha, best known simply as Garrincha. Little bird, he was a Brazilian professional footballer who played as a right winger. Garrincha was born in Pau Grande, a district of Margem, in the state of Rio de Janeiro, in 1933. He was born with his right leg 6 centimetres shorter than his left. Also, his left leg turned outwards and his right turned inwards, leading one doctor to certify him as a cripple as a child. His father was an alcoholic, drinking cachaça heavily, fermented sugarcane, a problem which Garrincha would inherit. He was a boy with a carefree attitude. He was smaller than other kids his age. When his sister Rosa noticed he was as small as a little bird, she started calling him Garrincha, the northeastern name for the wren, a little brown bird. Garrincha was known to all footballing scouts, but did not arrive in professional football until his late teens, because he had no interest in a professional career, despite his immense talent. Garrincha had 3 passions. One was football, second was the ladies, third was alcohol, and I am still not sure what order they came in. He is widely described as one of the greatest players of all time, and by many, the greatest dribbler ever. Just like the bird that gave him his name, young Garrincha did not take well to rules or confinement. Until he was 7 years old, his life revolved around swimming in the river, kicking a football about, and hunting birds. All he wanted to do was kill birds, one after another, like ducks on a fairground stall. He knocked doves, finches, parrots, and even Garrinchas out of the sky with a well-aimed throw or a shot from his catapult. He didn't eat the animals he took home. He killed for the pleasure of hitting the target, and besides, his favourite meal was rice, beans and spaghetti. His home was Pau Grande. The simple life never left him. When Garrincha wasn't kicking a ball around its dirt roads, hunting birds, animals, or fishing and swimming in the river that ran by the little town. But he always made time for the fairer sex. At last a contract. At 14 he started work, 48 hours a week, earning 1.2 cruzeros an hour, but he spent half his life skipping work or sleeping in the bales of cotton. But he was never sacked because of a ball code. One of the bosses was also president of the local football team, where Garrincha was a promising player. In 1948, however, Garrincha's luck ran out and he was fired, and his father, Amaro, kicked him out of the house, so he saw the church bandstand had a roof but no walls, so he adopted that as his temporary new home. But 2 weeks later, the Boko persuaded the bosses to give him his job back in the cloth section. The cloth section was populated by dozens of women who doted on Garrincha, and his hormones were running wild, and Nair, the girl who looked after him when he was homeless, would play a prominent role in his life. The clay field he had practice on was filled with holes, and perched on the edge of an embankment, just dribbling the ball on that rutted and uneven surface was a skill in itself. But Garrincha and a couple of his friends would usually play against 7 or 8 others. It was fairer that way. When he reached the age for military service, Garrincha reported to the 1st Cavalry Regiment in Petropolis, wearing only his shorts. The sergeant took one look at him and pronounced him physically handicapped and discharged him immediately. Serrano de Petropolis signed into a contract in 1951, paying him a symbolic wage, 30 cruzeros per game plus lunch. Playing for Pal Grande. After playing professionally for 3 months, he grew tired of travelling up and down the road every Sunday to Petropolis. Forgetting he had signed a contract, he never went back. In the eyes of Pal Grande manager Pinto, the best player was Vu, who played in midfield, so he moved Garrincha out to the right wing, and with Vu's brain in midfield and Garrincha out on the right wing, Pal Grande went unbeaten for 2 years. On those Sunday afternoons, Garrincha shone. He would leave 2 or 3 defenders on the seat of their pants, and then with a gin or a feint send another over the touchline before moving into the box, dribble around the goalkeeper and shoot into the empty net. Roughly speaking, that was also what he was doing with the girls of Pal Grande, like Nair, who only had eyes for Garrincha, but in that respect, she was only one of many. At a dance held by the factory, Garrincha and Nair cracked out of the back door and finally did what he had been trying to do ever since Nair looked after him under the bandstand. The inevitable happened. Garrincha told his father, who went nuts, and the wedding took place on October 20th, 1952. 2 days after Garrincha's 19th birthday. At last, Botafogo. Life couldn't have been more perfect for Garrincha in Pal Grande. He had comfort, women and credit at the local bar. In other words, leisure, pleasure and freedom. Everything he needed. So when a man named Arati asked Garrincha to come and have a trial with Botafogo, it took him a year to say yes. However, one person believed Arati's stories enough to go and check for himself. Several months later, Botafogo fanatic Salgado went to Pal Grande to scout Garrincha, who played 2 games, winning both matches 5-0, with Garrincha outstanding in both. So when the games were over, Salgado approached Garrincha on the sideline saying, "You're coming with me to Botafogo." The following Tuesday, Salgado met Garrincha at the train station him to Botafogo in a taxi. And when they arrived, Garrincha was told to get ready for a session with the youth team. He was sensational, setting off into space to receive a pass, but the ball arrived about 3 feet behind him. On the run, Garrincha flicked it with his heel over the oncoming defender, brought it down, and then hammered the ball against the bar. Newton Cardoso, the youth team coach, and the other 21 players were amazed. Their jaws dropped. No one had ever seen anything like that before. At the end of the match, Cardoso asked Garrincha if he could come back tomorrow to work out with the senior professionals. When he had gone, Cardoso bumped into some reserve team players and said to them, "When you see his bent legs tomorrow, you won't believe he can play football. He's going to be a star." The big stage. When Garrincha arrived, the coach decided to put him up against the great Nilton Santos, the international fullback, saying to an apprehensive Garrincha, "Just play your normal game. Everyone is the same here." Garrincha took off his tatty shirt, then his even scruffier trousers, and all eyes turned to his legs. When they saw his bent legs, they all thought that Newton Cardoso was out of his mind if he thought this guy could play football. Paulo Amaral blew the whistle to start the game. Garrincha got the ball and found himself face to face with the tall and powerful defender Nilton Santos, who had not yet won the nickname the Encyclopedia of Football, which would be given to him during the 1958 World Cup. 10 minutes had passed by the time Nilton Santos saw Garrincha coming towards him with the ball. Then he stopped. Nilton moved slowly forwards to take him on, and by the time he realised what was going on, Garrincha was past him, and a few seconds later they were face to face again. This time Nilton registered his presence with a tough tackle, but once again Garrincha was too fast for him. A few minutes later, Garrincha had the temerity to put the ball through Nilton's legs. Nobody had ever nutmegged Nilton Santos before. Who was this kid? But it was not all Garrincha. Time has served to exaggerate what happened. Overall, it was a fairly even tussle, which was what made it so amazing. On one side was Nilton Santos, capped 16 times by Brazil. On the other was an unknown player with bent legs who preferred to play football barefoot. Now they had to sign him before other teams were alerted. Botafogo need a signature. They insisted that Garrincha stay until Paulo Azevedo arrived at 9 o'clock, and they hammered out an agreement. Garrincha signed a blank contract, which would happen many times, that paid him 300 cruceros more than he earned at the factory. Botafogo brought Garrincha from Serrano to Protopolis, the club that held his registration, for 500 cruceros, or about $27. No one had ever paid so little for such a great player. In his first match on June 21st, a Garrincha goal gave Botafogo a 1-0 victory over Avelo. In his second, a week later, they defeated Cantagallo 5-1, and for one of the goals, Garrincha dribbled past the entire defence before turning in front of an open goal and passed the ball to Ariosto to score, who was amazed that Garrincha didn't score himself. That would be the first of many questions Botafogo would ask about Garrincha, and why did he insist on dribbling even when after he had beaten the whole team. For Garrincha, the joy of playing didn't come with scoring goals, or winning games, or even making money. Goals, victories, win bonuses, they were all just the inevitable products of the business of football. when for Garrincha the fun was in dribbling, just dribbling. Garrincha, the footballing Houdini. Garrincha was simple, carefree and unambitious. For him, football was not to be taken seriously. When Brazil lost the World Cup in 1950, he found it silly that people were upset and he went fishing rather than listen to the final on the radio. Reluctantly, he went for trials at the big Rio clubs, and at Vasco he was told to go home because he had not brought any boots. At Fluminense, he left before the end to catch the last train home. Later, aged 19, Garrincha made it to Botafogo, and only because he was almost dragged there by an ex-Botafogo player who had seen him play. On the second day of his trial, Nilton Santos, the Brazilian international left-back, said after the game, "I think it is imperative that we give this guy a contract. I never want to face him again. We are better with him than having play against us. He is a footballing Houdini." First season. Brazilian sportsmen at the time were in no better condition than the average man in the street. They looked healthy but were awash with parasites, undernourished, anemic, and it was not unheard of for players to have syphilis or tuberculosis, and dental problems were rife, making them unable to chew their food, which brought on digestive problems. Garrincha was no exception to the unhealthy rule, and when he arrived at the club with his face swollen following the removal of a tooth, he missed the weekend match, but a week later on July 19th, Botafogo were at home to Bom Sucesso and were losing 2-1 after 60 minutes. Then they were awarded a penalty. Nobody wanted to take it. Juninho, Arati, Nilton Santos and striker Dino all made sure they were nowhere near the penalty area. But then they saw Garrincha placing the ball on the spot. He slammed the ball into the corner of the net. The goal inspired Garrincha, who went on to play blind. Dribbling, attempting bicycle kicks, being upended in the box and scoring the fourth and sixth goals in Botafogo's 6-3 victory, the second of which came in the last minute off the outside of his right foot from an impossible angle. After the match, the two men who carried Garrincha on their shoulders were his friend Pincel and Swing. They and 30 others had travelled from Pau Grande to see their friend play, chanting his name all the game. Botafogo finished in third place in the Carioca Championship that year. Though Garrincha was the second top scorer with 20 goals in 26 games, just two behind Flamengo's Paraguayan striker Benitez, who won the title. The club had no idea what Garrincha got up to when he returned to Pau Grande after a game. His first stop was Osmar's bar, right there on the train station, where he filled up on batidas, cocktails of rum, sugar and fruit juice. From there he would go to the house Pincel and Swing's chef with friends to throw drinks back all Sunday night and well into Monday. It was a miracle they made it to Tuesday alive. European Tour. In 1955, Botafogo finished in 7th place behind the title winners Flamengo, but arranged a European Tour for 1956, taking in 22 games against teams from Belgium, England, France, Spain, Holland and Hungary. Between March and the end of June, the club packed and unpacked their bags in 45 cities. On February 7, 1957, with 21 minutes gone in a match against Honved, Garrincha took a pass from Evaristo out on the left wing and left two Hungarian defenders in his way, moved into the penalty area and smashed the ball into the net. As the fans celebrated the goal, the lights went out at the Maracana. The short circuit of Maracana's electrics marked the end of an era. It was Honved's last on a short tour of Brazil, and it was the last time Honved would be Honved, or at least the Honved of Puskás, Bocik, Kocsis, Zibo, Budaj, Hidaguti and Sandor, the greatest Hungarian players of all time. Hungarian football would never be the same again. Honved were on tour in Europe in November 1956 when the USSR invaded Hungary to put down the uprising against the communist regime. Honved were playing a Spanish side in Switzerland, and they told the man running the tour they would not be returning home. They were refugees, and from that moment they became a travelling side that played its home matches on the pitches of Western Europe. Champions in 1957. Botafogo spent almost the whole of the 1957 tournament in second or third place, always a point behind Fluminense or Flamengo. But the championship began to take shape, and with only one game to play, Fluminense only needed a draw against Botafogo to clinch the title. Fans of both clubs would never forget that December day in 1957. Fluminense had organised a lengthy tour of South America, Mexico and Central America to celebrate their championship victory. Botafogo, however, had not read the script. Paulo Valentin scored in the 3rd minute and completed his hat-trick by the 40th minute. Every time Garrincha got the ball, he went round his marker Alter, then past centre-half Clovis, before finding Valentin, and in the 53rd minute, Garrincha found him again to make the score 4-1. In the 57th minute, Garrincha made it 5 after beating 6 players, and in the end, they became champions by winning 6-2. Immediately, Fluminense players cast doubt on the legitimacy of Botafogo's crushing victory, saying that some players competed under the influence of drugs. In truth, the real stimulant that day was Garrincha, and the Fluminense coach said later, not even 5 full-backs could have shut down Garrincha today. The World Cup was just 6 months away, and anyone who had doubts that Garrincha should be in the team that went to Sweden were dispelled that afternoon. He was magical. An ice cream in the sun. Garrincha's tonsils were the size of marbles and should have been taken out by his club, but Garrincha always avoided appointments. If it was out of fear, no one took him to task. Removing tonsils in Brazil in the 1950s would not have produced any less blood had the operation been carried out by Jack the Ripper. The majority had intestinal parasites to spare. Several were anemic. One player had syphilis, tonsils begging to be removed, but worst of all was the state of their teeth. In total, the 33 players had 470 back teeth between them, an average of more than 15 each. When it was all over, he enjoyed an ice cream, but he lost a lot of blood during the surgery and came out of it 9 pounds lighter. Turning up at the Grand Hotel in Araxa, as white as a sheet, yet still smiling, saying, "I fulfilled a childhood dream. I got to eat ice cream after having my tonsils out." The only horizontal exercise was sleeping, but that changed when 2 local beauties, one dark, one blonde, checked into the players' hotel and found themselves on the same floor. The blonde one was disappointed that her favourite player wasn't there, but the dark one's favourite was and she discreetly met him in her room. Newspapers were alerted, and the scandal broke, and the shadow of suspicion fell on the entire side. And now the two girls were moved to the Colombo Hotel, just down the road, which was when the blonde got her hands on the man she was looking for. The dark one was goalkeeper Gilmar's, the blonde, the recently arrived Garrincha. Never listen to psychologists. Until 1958, the general consensus was that when it came to the World Cups, the Brazilian players did not have what it took, and the catastrophic defeats by Uruguay in 1950 and Hungary in 1954 seemed to bear that out. When it came to the crunch, Brazil weren't up to the task. This time they appointed a psychologist, João Carvalhais. His job was to measure their intelligence and psychological balance, just as he did for those applying for jobs as bus drivers at his day's job with the Sao Paulo transport company. Garrincha did terrible in the test, which classed him as having a primary school education, below average intelligence and zero aggression. Out of a possible 123 points, he got 38, not even enough to get him a job driving a bus. Pelé, who scored 68 points out of the 123, was described thus: he's obviously infantile, lacking the necessary fighting spirit, and does not possess the sense of responsibility necessary for a team game. As well as Pelé and Garrincha being unsure of a place in the team, Nilton Santos was also under scrutiny, especially after he was taken to the cleaners in a practice match against Garrincha, but Nilton got his place back for good in the two friendlies against Bulgaria. Garrincha silenced the terraces with magic. Brazil's 3-1 win over Bulgaria on May 18th at the Pacaembu was the first time that Garrincha and Pelé played together up front. And no one could have guessed it then, but that Sunday afternoon was the start of a long and marvellous story. When those two were on the field together, Brazil would never lose a game. 3 days before Brazil set off for Europe, Corinthians defender Clemente caught Pelé hard on the knee. They went down clutching his knee. The injury was serious. Pelé might not recover in time for the finals, but they would wait a week until the day the squad list had to be submitted to FIFA before making a decision. Brazil touched down in Rome on May 25th. From there they took a train north to Florence, where 2 days later they beat a powerful Fiorentina side, including 6 members of the national team, 4-0 in the famous game during which Garrincha beat half the Italian side before, with typical nonchalance, dribbling the ball into the net. It was the 4th goal in the 75th minute that dealt the killer blow, as Garrincha transformed the Italian players into toy soldiers. First he went past Robotti, then Magnini, and lastly Servato. Goalkeeper Sarti came off his line. Garrincha stole him a dummy and waltzed around him. The goal was empty, but Garrincha waited for Robotti to chase back. The little bird threw his shoulders one way, went the other, leaving Robotti clinging to the goalpost. Then he walked the ball into the net. He flicked the ball up, stuck it under his arm, and coolly started to walk back to the centre circle. The goal was a stunner. The terraces fell silent in awe. 1958 World Cup. By 1958, Brazil were feeling the pressure of their unfulfilled potential. They had still not won a World Cup. Both 1950 and 1954 courageous Uruguayans and then against the violent Hungarians. Before even arriving in Sweden, see the photograph, Garrincha had ignored the rules prohibiting players from wearing hats or carrying umbrellas. The hat was for his friend Pinsel, the umbrella for swing back in Palo Grande. He never forgot his friends. Brazil left nothing to chance. The squad was based in a resort near Gothenburg, and knowing his countrymen's tendencies, the team doctor insisted that the hotel's 28 female staff be replaced with 28 men. With his white hair and his keen eye for the game, former Fluminense trainer Anasto Santos fitted the bill perfectly as the team spy, who had watched Austria, England and the USSR. His folders detailed formations, tactics, place and dead ball situation, and in an era without videos, Santos's observations were vital to coach Viola, Nascimento, Gosling and Amaral. Perfect team talk, 19 words. Garrincha and Pelé did not play in the first two games, a 3-0 win over Austria and a 0-0 draw with England, but the third match was against the USSR. Cold War propaganda fueled a fear of the Soviets. Vicente Fiola, the coach, shook up the team sheet and dispatched his two secret weapons, and then he turned to Didi and said, "Don't forget, Didi, the first ball goes to Garrincha." Then he turned to the little bird and said, "Try to throw them off balance right from the start." The referee blows his whistle to start the match. Didi pushes the ball to the right, 15 seconds. Kuznetsov goes towards him. Garrincha feints left but goes right. Kuznetsov falls to the ground, 25 seconds. Garrincha takes the ball round Kuznetsov again, 27 seconds. And again, 30 seconds. And once more, a startled Kuznetsov is on the floor, the fans are on the feet, 32 seconds. Garrincha goes forward, Kuznetsov follows him, supported by Voinov and Krzyzewski, 34 seconds. Garrincha pulls the ball this way, then that, and sets off down the wing. The three Russians are scattered on the ground. The stadium explodes with laughter. 38 seconds. Garrincha shoots from a tight angle. The ball rockets Yashin's left hand post and goes out for a goal kick. 40 seconds. The fans go mad. Garrincha returns to the middle of the park as ungainly as ever. He is widely applauded. Garrincha moves forward with the ball. Kuznetsov takes another tumble. Didi asks for the ball. 45 seconds. Didi sends a curved pass over Neto and the ball falls at Pelé's feet. Pelé gives it to Vava. 48 seconds. They were the magical 3 minutes. Vava to Didi, to Garrincha, back to Pelé. Pelé shoots. The ball hits the bar and goes over. 55 seconds. The pace is mind-boggling, as is Garrincha's rhythm. Yashin's shirt is soaked in sweat. The wave of attacks continue. Time after time, Garrincha decimates the Russians. There is hysteria in the stadium and an explosion when Vava scores after exactly 3 minutes. Journalist Gabriel Hano would say later that they were the greatest 3 minutes in the history of football. The onslaught was so impressive that as soon as Brazil scored, Lev Yashin congratulated the first Brazilian to come near him, which happened to be Pelé. Garrincha continued to run rings round him, and in one memorable incident, after leaving a defender on the ground, Garrincha put his foot on the ball and offered his hand to help him up, then started running again as as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Brazil would score just once more when Vava doubled his tally 31 minutes into the second half, but it felt like the biggest hammering in World Cup history. At no time did the Soviets threaten to score. Gilmar had only one save to make. Brazil mounted 36 attacks, and only Yashin's brilliance saved them from a total catastrophe. From that day on, for the Brazilians listening at home, there were no more Botafogo fans, Fluminense fans, Flamengo fans, Corinthian fans or Grêmio fans. Everyone was now a Garrincha fan, even when he played against their own team. What happened before the game? Garrincha didn't know the words to Brazil's national anthem, so when the team lined up before the match against the Soviets, he stood hunched over, his hands in invisible back pockets, his feet splayed apart like a scarecrow. But when the whistle went, a dancer emerged from the crooked body, and as the papers put it, tore down the Iron Curtain. One stock-on paper ran a story with the headlines, "Congratulations Gothenburg, on Thursday you get to see Garrincha again." An Englishman said, why wasn't he picked against England? He would have beaten them single-handedly, and no club in Europe could afford such a formidable player. The day after the match, Adolfo Marquez handed Garrincha his win bonus of $50, while in Brazil he was elected Sportsman of the Week and given a bicycle. The psychologist examined the players. Of the 11 players tested, 9 failed. Only Pelé and Nilton Santos passed, and when the results were passed to coach Viola, he ignored the results and chose common sense. For the first time since 1950, when they almost won the tournament, Brazilians took to the streets to celebrate in Rio. Jubilant fans in cars and mopeds cruised along the beaches of Copacabana and Ipanema, waving banners and mixing with the samba schools that had come down from the favelas to take part in the festivities. There was hope, a mood of genuine excitement. Garrincha, the little bird, had made winning the World Cup a possibility. Now they could dream the impossible dream. Quarter-final versus Wales. The winner of the match against Wales would move into the last four, but their opponents represented their worst nightmare. A tough side that would quickly get 11 men behind the ball. Didi played the best game of his life. It was a memorable day for Pelé, who would go on to score one of the best of more than 1,000 goals in his career. Garrincha beat left-back Hopkins before laying the ball off to Didi, who passed the ball to Pelé on the penalty spot, and with his back to goal, he lifted the ball over Williams, turned it round him, and flicked it over with his left foot to volley past goalkeeper Jack Kelsey with his right. This important goal guaranteed a 1-0 win and a place in the semi-finals. Back in Brazil, President Kubitschek was sat in the Palazzo de Catete with Garrincha's father, Amaro, who was too embarrassed even to speak. And when Pelé scored the winning goal, he only just stopped himself from screaming an expletive. The president smiled at him. At the end of the game, the president slapped Amaro on the back, handing him a 200 Cruzeiro note, thanked him for all his son was doing for Brazil before ordering a car to take him back to Pau Grande. World Cup semi-final against France. France had scored 15 goals, 8 from Fontaine and conceded 7, while Brazil had only scored 6, but had yet to concede a goal. At the start of the game, he put a cross over the bar, and from the goal kick, Garrincha took possession, beat three men, passed to Zito, who laid it off to Didi, who found Vava, and he scored. 90 seconds on the clock. With 8 minutes gone, Fontaine levelled the scores, and for 15 minutes the French were all over Brazil, and Didi realised he had to get Garrincha involved, and as soon as he was dancing his way around French defenders, it gave heart to Brazil, who took control with Didi scoring after 39 minutes. It was plain sailing from there. Pelé scored a superb second half hat-trick, although the French pulled the goal back to make it 5-2. Brazil used the second period to show their superiority, much to the delight of the Swedish crowd. Superstition was rife. Brazil were now faced with the problem of what colour to wear. Officials informed Brazil that they would draw lots to discover which team would play in yellow. Sweden won, so Brazil had to decide between white, green or blue. They plumped for blue, as 4 out of the last 5 winners wore blue, Uruguay and Italy twice each. In fact, everyone in the delegation was a slave to superstition, including the non-playing officials. Zagallo carried a lucky charm in his sock. All the players had a set order in which they would come down for breakfast, get on and off the team bus and run onto the pitch. And Gilmar had to be the last to get on the bus. 2 members of the backroom staff volunteered to go to Stockholm city centre to buy a set of blue shirts, and they spent Saturday morning picking the badges and numbers off the yellow shirts and sewing them onto the new blue ones. 2 days before the final, it was announced that Frenchman Maurice Guy would referee the match and had been in charge of Brazil's games against Austria and the USSR. Guy liked the Brazilians because they were skillful and disciplined, so the Brazilians invited him to visit Rio on an all-expenses visit after the World Cup. Guy politely declined the offer, but later that year Guy and his family spent a happy holiday in Rio. World Cup final. Inevitably, Brazil started the game poorly, and after 4 minutes, Sweden took the lead. Brazil's first 2 goals were identical moves created by Garrincha. He slalommed up the right wing and Vava converted his crosses. He reached the byline 15 times to create havoc in the Swedish defence each time. Back in Brazil, each second half goal, 1 from Zagallo and 2 from Pelé, sent people into raptures. Even when Sweden scored a second goal, it mattered little because Brazil were world champions by a final score of 5-2. A few moments later, the Jules Rimet trophy was presented to Bellini, who lifted the trophy above his head with both hands to invent a gesture that is now imitated all over the world. Journey home to a nation who love to celebrate. Nelson Rodriguez said, "The World Cup consecrated the man with bent legs. He is considered a retard, but Garrincha proved in the World Cup that we are a retarded once. Because we think, we rationalise next to the prodigious talent of his reflexes. We are luggards, buffaloes and hippopotamuses." The poet Paul Campos compared him to an artistic genius, like a poet touched by an angel, like a composer following a melody that fell from the sky, like a dancer hooked to a rhythm. Garrincha plays football by pure inspiration and and magic. Brazil flew home on July 1st on a Pan Air DC-7, piloted by the same man who had flown them from Rio 37 days earlier. After brief stops in London and Paris, they headed for Lisbon, attending receptions laid on by Benfica and Sporting, before leaving the next morning for Recife in northeastern Brazil. It was 2 a.m. on the morning of July 3rd when the players finally left the presidential palace, 42 hours since they left Stockholm, to head home and recover. Thrilling end to the season. A fortnight after lifting the trophy in Sweden, Garrincha, Didi and Nilton Santos lined up against Fluminense in the opening match of the 1958 Carioca Championship. Clubs with World Cup heroes in their team like Botafogo would play on Saturday or Sundays in the championship, and during the week tour all regions of Brazil to be greeted by huge crowds. Botafogo had 4 such men in their squad: Garrincha, the demon with crooked legs; Didi, the thermometer of the cup; Nilton Santos, the encyclopedia of football; Zagallo, bought from Flamengo for $7,000, was the little ant. They love their nicknames in Brazil. With 2 matches to go, Vasco were 4 points clear of Botafogo and Flamengo, their last 2 opponents, but they lost both games, so a 3-way tie resulted in a playoff. Flamengo beat Botafogo 2-1, Botafogo beat Vasco 1-0, and Vasco beat Flamengo 2-0, so they were still tied. So another round of games, called the Super Championship, was needed. Botafogo drew 2-2 with Flamengo and lost 2-1 to Vasco, ruling them out of the race. Flamengo drew an exciting match with Vasco 1-1 to hand the title to their rivals. It was so exciting that a factory worker, Avelino Gomez, had a heart attack and died. His daughter, Elsa Suarez, was in Argentina singing, and she would come to play a crucial role in the life of the little bird. Didi leaves for Real Madrid. In 1959, while Garrincha was scoring with the ladies, Pelé was scoring goals, and that year he played an unbelievable 103 games of football for Santos, Brazil, the Sao Paulo 11, the 6th Coast Guard, the Army and the Armed Forces. However, while Garrincha had some great games, it was Fluminense who won the Carioca title, with Botafogo in 2nd place, having lost 2 of their most important players halfway through the season: Valentin to Boca Juniors and Didi to Real Madrid. Real Madrid put in 2 bids, $80,000 for Didi and $250,000 for Garrincha, just over 3 times as much. Botafogo decided they could do without Didi, the player of the tournament in the 1958 World Cup, but they refused to entertain bids for their star winger. In January 1960, when Swedish officials travelled to Botafogo to tell Garrincha he had a son, a boy called Ulf, born in Halmstad earlier, the officials asked Garrincha to sign a document freeing him from any parental or financial responsibilities. The little bird signed immediately. Botafogo had made a European tour, hence the boy born in Sweden. His father, Amaro, had been diagnosed with liver cancer, and his health had been deteriorating ever since. Garrincha ran him over with his car the year for Spain, he had gone with the idea of masterminding the team, but Real already had a mastermind, Alfredo Di Stefano, who thought Didi was lazy and didn't train hard enough. So he returned to Botafogo, who welcomed him with open arms. Botafogo began the 1961 Carioca Championship with one of the greatest forward lines ever seen: Garrincha, Didi, Amoroso, Amarildo and Zagallo, and they went 22 games without defeat to be declared champions on the day they suffered their one and only loss, 2-1 to America. While there was a romance in being a free spirit on the pitch, Garrincha's friends began to worry about his naivety off it, so they suggested he employ a financial advisor. Two bank representatives went to his home in Palo Grande and were shocked to discover money rotted in cupboards, behind furniture and in fruit bowls. The house was a slum. Botafogo had taken advantage of Garrincha's naivety, giving him blank contracts to sign, which they filled in with salaries as low as they could get away with. Garrincha was the club's main selling point, yet he did not earn as much as his teammates. When he complained, the fans turned against him, accusing him of being mercenary. Build up to the Chile World Cup. 1962 was also the beginning of the end. Garrincha's bent legs had been his strength. They were now his weakness. The way his tibia bent his femur meant that each time he swiveled, his body, the cartilage was crushed. He was told he needed an operation in 1959, but decided against it because his faith healer advised against it. And then he met Elsa Suarez. She was a kindred spirit. Brazil took almost the same team to the 1962 World Cup in Chile. Pelé, still only 21, had by then established himself as the most complete forward in the world. In 1961, he scored 111 goals in 75 appearances, but he limped off in the second World Cup game, missing the rest of the competition. Most of the other Brazilians were in the twilight of their playing careers, except Garrincha, and it is unlikely that any other player in the history of the World Cup made up for the loss of his friend and won the World Cup almost single-handedly. Joining them on the coast of Vina del Mar would be Czechoslovakia, Spain and Mexico, where favourites Brazil beat Mexico 2-0, drew 0-0 with the Czechs when Pelé was injured and didn't play again, beat Spain 2-1 and was set up a quarter-final match with England. Quarter-final versus England. England faced a Brazil team that contained 5 Botafogo players, including Garrincha, who opened the scoring in the 32nd minute with a full-blooded header from a Zagallo corner. But 6 minutes later, Jerry Hitchens of Inter Milan equalised, and after the interval, Brazil began like an express train. A thundering free kick by Vava flashed past the defensive wall. Springer failed to hold the ball, and Vava followed up to head the loose ball home. England battered on, but 6 minutes later, Garrincha scored a memorable goal, which effectively ended the contest, when he hit an incredible swerving shot from 25 yards, beating Springer all the way to set up a semi-final against the host, Chile, in Santiago. The idea that Garrincha could be sent off for hitting an appointment was as unlikely as St. Francis of Assisi taking part in a dove shooting contest, or Snow White getting stoned to death for cruelty to dwarves. That's that's what happened during the Brazil versus Chile World Cup semi-final on June 13, 1962. And the man responsible was Chile's brutal centre-half, Eladio Rojas, who had already come up against Garrincha when Colo-Colo played Botafogo, and he was not in the mood to be given the run around again. Realising that to avoid further embarrassment, he would have to sharpen his arsenal. From the word goal, he kicked Garrincha, elbowed him, poked him in the eye, all in front of the Peruvian referee Arturo Zamazaki. It made no difference. Garrincha ran rings round him and the rest of the Chilean defence. Brazil versus Chile. Garrincha scored the first goal with a left foot shot, the second with a perfect header, and laid on the third for Vava. He was the chief architect of Brazil's 4-2 victory, and his performance confirmed him as the player of the tournament. But in the 85th minute and the game over as a contest, Roja kicked Garrincha once too often, and the little man's patience snapped. He got up, walked up to Rojas, and more as a joke than in retaliation, kneed him in the backside, whereupon Rojas fell to the ground as if the Andes had come down on top of him. The linesman, who was standing a few feet away, raised his flag, and the referee ran over, pulling out the red card. Garrincha walked off the pitch with his head bowed and the boos of the crowd ringing in his ears. Elsa gave him a long way from the stands, but all of a sudden Garrincha raised a hand to his head and then crashed to the ground, laid out by a stone thrown from the stands. Chile, like Sweden in 1958, were no pushover. They had beaten Switzerland, Italy and the USSR to meet Brazil. The inquest. No one would have overcome Brazil that day, even with the help of a referee like Yamazaki. The Peruvian had a terrible game, ignoring some of the worst offences and missing many more. He didn't see the Chileans commit brutal fouls. He didn't give Garrincha a penalty. He choked off a legitimate goal by Vava. He gave Chile a non-existent penalty, which resulted in their second goal, and he sent off Garrincha for something silly. Brazil still won 4-2 to reach a final showdown with Czechoslovakia. The big question was whether Brazil, already without Pelé, would have Garrincha back for the final. In those days, a sending off did not mean automatic suspension from the next game, but it looked like he would miss the final the following Sunday, a decision based on the referee's report. A Brazilian on the FIFA board, Mozart Di Giorgio, contacted the linesman with an offer of a ticket home to Montevideo via Paris. The linesman left Chile the next morning, a slight detour. Garrincha's representative was lawyer Maud Maduro, who, speaking in a high-pitched voice, the 24-stone Maduro brilliantly used the referee's report and the linesman's notes to show how the incident had been misinterpreted. Others followed his lead, and Garrincha was absolved by 5 votes to 2 and given a symbolic reprimand. Over 60 years later, FIFA are still a corrupt body. Would Pelé play? While Garrincha was bringing life to the dressing room, the players were worrying about the injury to Pelé, which had improved more than expected, and if he really pushed himself, there was a chance he would be fit for the final. Hilton Gosling, the coach, however, would not hear of it. He remembered how Hungary had put an injured Puskás in the team to face West Germany in the 1954 final, with disastrous results. The Brazilians spread a rumour that Pelé was fit to play, so the Czechs would have to plan for him to play. The plan worked, as the Czechs were only certain when the teams took to the field, and the counter-espionage department worked well, managing to hide another key piece of information from everyone, even the Brazilian journalists. Garrincha woke up on the day of the final with a fever that registered 104 degrees Fahrenheit. He played only thanks to a dose of aspirin, dancing in front of the three Czechs who were marking him before laying the ball off to Zito or Didi, who would then release Amarildo or Vava. By the time the Czechs worked out that Garrincha was having an off day, it was too late. Brazil went 1-0 down, heads didn't drop, and Amarildo equalised before Zito scored just before half-time. The third goal from Vava killed off their opponents, and the final minutes were a cakewalk, with Garrincha putting his foot on the ball and challenging the Czechs to take it off him. None of them dared. Brazil were double World Cup winners. In the stand, Elsa Suarez fainted when the final whistle blew. World Cup plus the Championship. The photo shows the World Cup winners of 1962. Brazil and Garrincha returned to Botafogo with the strip he had worn in the final, and he asked Sandro Moreira to put it on the altar of the San Francisco de Paula Church in Petropolis. Moreira locked the strip in the cupboard, promising to carry out Garrincha's wishes the next day. Of course he didn't, keeping the strip for the rest of his life. In the Championship, Botafogo was struggling, and with a few weeks left, they were 7 points behind leaders Flamengo. Flamengo had slipped during the running, and come the last day of the season, Botafogo were just 1 point behind their city rivals. The game at the Maracana, in front of 146,000 spectators, saw Garrincha score a hat-trick in a 3-0 victory, but no one could have guessed it, not even Garrincha, that Botafogo versus Flamengo on December 15th, 1962 would in some ways be Garrincha's final match. 1966 World Cup. In 1963, Garrincha's knee was in such a bad way that he was hardly able to play 2 games in a row. Splintered cartilage caused it to swell with liquid, so that it needed to be perforated and drained regularly, leading to an operation in 1964, but he was never the same player again. Though well short of match fitness and still struggling with a knee injury, Garrincha played in the first match of the tournament, a 2-0 win against Bulgaria, and he scored the goal of the match with a free kick taken with the outside of his foot. The second goal was scored by Pele, and this was the only time when Garrincha and Pele scored goals in the same game. Then Brazil lost 3-1 to Hungary at Goodison Park in Garrincha's last ever international match, which was the only time he lost a match with the Brazil national team. He did not play in the last match of the first round against Portugal, and they were eliminated in the first round. Retirement and farewell. The photo shows the bust of Garrincha at the Maracana Stadium. In 1973, Garrincha decided to leave professional football. Apart from his age, 39, he had become a grandfather for the first time. On December 19, 1973, a farewell match for Garrincha between a FIFA World Team and Brazil was celebrated at the Maracana Stadium in Rio in front of 131,000 spectators. The FIFA team was composed mainly of Argentina and Uruguayan players, while Brazil fielded Pele, Carlos Alberto and several members of the 1970 World Cup Garrincha could leave the pitch and receive the applause of the crowd. Garrincha then did a lap of honour before disappearing through the stadium's tunnel for the last time. Despair and depression. Garrincha liked cars, but he drove them badly. He had once run over his father on a journey from Pau Grande. He hit a lorry at 50 miles an hour. The car flipped and Elsa's mother died. This accident triggered a depression. He tried to gas himself, the first of several suicide attempts. His football career was over. He had killed the mother of the woman he loved. Throughout his career, he astounded colleagues by his capacity and desire for alcohol. And when he hung up his boots, the drinking increased. With neither income or savings, Garrincha asked the Brazilian Sports Federation for a loan to buy a house. They refused. On the same day he disappeared and was found drunk and crying in front of the church in the centre of Rio. Elsa thought that a change of scene might pull him out of it, so they moved to Rome, where Elsa found work as a singer. But Garrincha had nothing to do, so he was made coffee ambassador for the Brazilian Coffee Institute, an easy job that entailed him shaking hands with everyone who attended the Brazilian stall at trade fairs. He failed spectacularly. On their return to Brazil, Elsa thought she would stop Garrincha drinking by having a child. Garrinchina, little Garrincha, was born on July 9th, 1976. Inevitable death. With a baby in the house, things got worse. He started beating Elsa and she moved out, fearing it would turn his violence on the child. After 15 years together, their relationship ended. Garrincha married for the third time. His new wife bore him another daughter, his 10th baby girl, but his ways did not change. On January 19, 1983, Garrincha spent the morning out drinking, and when he arrived home in the afternoon, he fell ill and went to lay down. An ambulance was called from the local clinic. The doctors did not recognize him. His body was bloated with alcohol, unrecognizable from the nimble athlete of his youth. He was checked in and then transferred to a psychiatric hospital in an alcoholic coma. Sadly, Garrincha, the brilliant footballer, died at 6 a.m. the following morning. Andrew Downey, who translated the book from Portuguese into English, said, "When I first arrived in Brazil, the subject turned to football, and I heard someone say that Garrincha was the best player Brazil ever produced. I asked, what about Pelé? So then I started to ask everyone who they felt was Brazil's best ever player. And the reply invariably was Garrincha. Even those born years after he stopped playing preferred him." The funeral. He had been hospitalised 8 times in the previous year, and by the time of his death, he was a physical and mental wreck. His last years were unhappy and obscure. He seemed to have become the forgotten hero. But his funeral procession from the Maracana to Pau Grande drew millions of fans, friends and former players to pay their respects, and his epitaph reads, "Here rests in peace, the one who was the joy of the people, Manny Garrincha." Regarding his dribbling ability, the Guardian newspaper in 2010 said, "The bottom line is incontestable. Garrincha was the greatest dribbler ever." Jana Santos, his Brazilian teammate, stated, "He had a childish spirit. Garrincha was football's answer to Charlie Chaplin." In the the entire history of football, no one made more people happy. When he was out there, the pitch was a circus ring, the ball a tamed animal, the match a party invitation. Garrincha nurtured his pet, the ball, and together they created such mischief that people almost died laughing. He jumped over it, it gambled around him, hid itself away, skipped off and made him run after it, and on the way his opponents ran into each other. Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan writer, said that. Andrew Downey translated the book from the Portuguese. Both on and off the field, George Best's exploits are legendary. No disrespect to Best, who even when I saw him playing for Hibs in the twilight of his career, was head and shoulders above everyone else on the pitch. But next to Garrincha, his achievements, if that is the word, are strictly second division. Let me spell it out. Best never played in the World Cup finals. Garrincha went there 3 times and twice came home with a winner's medal, the second of which in Chile in 1962 he is said to have won almost single-handedly. Best may have dated some of the most beautiful women on the planet, but when it comes to womanizing, he could not compare with Garrincha, who fathered at least 16 children by 5 different women, and those are just the ones we know about. Even when it came to drinking, Garrincha outdid the Irishman and drank himself into an early grave at the age of 49. In a country like Brazil, where at least a third of the people live in poverty, people admire and respect Pele, an impoverished man who turned his unparalleled talent with a football into great riches off it. But the people identify with Garrincha, their little bird. More Andrew Downey. If his football was not enough to endear him to his countrymen and women, then there was also the tragedies that seemed to throw themselves at it with the wrath of a malevolent fullback. Garrincha was born a cripple. He was taken advantage of by club directors. He suffered from alcoholism. He attempted suicide on several occasions. He killed his mother-in-law in a car crash. After he died, the curse continued. His 2 Brazilian sons both died in car crashes. Garrincha, the son he had with Suarez, perished when he was 9 on the same road as his grandmother had decades earlier. And Nenem, his son with an earlier girlfriend, died in an accident in Switzerland at the age of 28. And 2 of the 8 daughters he had with his wife Nair were dead from cancer before they were 50. Such tragedies do not happen to superstars. They happen to ordinary people. And when Brazilians see someone as gifted as Garrincha suffer, it was one more reason to see him as one of them. Perversely, the lows were as crucial in creating his legend as were the highs. Nowhere was that more poignantly evident than when he passed away in 1983. He died in a Rio hospital, but he had demanded to be buried in his home village at Pau Grande. And from the moment the fire engine carrying his body left the Maracana, where thousands had gathered to pay their respects, it was carried along by a wave of emotion. 2 very different characters. The reaction to Garrincha's death went far beyond what was expected. Jose Sergio of Rio's Federal University says there was a national sense of guilt. When someone dies, you take stock of all the person's life. Garrincha was identified with the public. He never lost his popular roots. He was also exploited by football. symbol of the majority of the Brazilians who were also exploited. Pele and Garrincha are named in the same breath so often that it is as if they were a performing double act or a brand name of bottled sporting excellence. Together they sum up an era. Yet Brazilians remember them more for their differences than their similarities. They were unexpectedly opposite characters. They did not even particularly get on. Pele is known as in Brazil as O Rei, the King, but in 1963 a biographical film was released called Garrincha, Alegria do Povo, Joy of the People. The nicknames tell you everything about these two fantastic players. Whereas Garrincha indulged in most of the vices available to him, Pele was a model player, leading an ascetic life, concentrating on training and self-improvement. He learned from others and improved, while Garrincha was unteachable. Pele had an athlete's perfect body. Garrincha looked as though he could not walk straight. When Garrincha was still stuffing his wages into a fruit bowl, Pele had registered his name as a trademark, employed a manager and invested money in business projects. Some thoughts. Without Garrincha, I would never have been a three-time world champion. That was Pele's view. Garrincha was an incredible player, one of the best there has ever been. He could do things with the ball that no other player could. More of Pele. Garrincha was more of a danger than Pele. I believe at the time he was a phenomenon, capable of sheer magic. It was difficult to know which way he was going to go because of his legs and because he was as comfortable on his left foot as his right. So he could cut inside or go down the line, and he had a ferocious shot as well. And that was Wales defender Mel Hopkins, who faced Garrincha in 1958. While Brazilians put Pele on a pedestal, they do not love him the way they love Garrincha. It is because Pele does not reflect national desires. Pele, above everything else, symbolises winning, while Garrincha symbolises playing for playing's sake. Brazil is not a country of winners, it is a country of people who like to have fun. It is not that Brazilians dislike Pele, far from it. In 1999, his Mercedes was stopped at traffic lights in Sao Paulo by two armed men. Approached the car, but on realising who was inside, they apologised, hid their guns and went away. Few people, including footballers, command such respect. A year later, in Rio, a similar incident occurred to Romario. The robbers took his Mercedes, his mobile phone, and Romario was made to walk on. Even though Pele helped Brazil win 3 World Cups, more than any other player, he was never the team's one outstanding member, unlike Garrincha in 1962. Final slide. Without Garrincha, I would never have been a 3-time world champion. Garrincha was an incredible player, one of the best there has ever been. He could do things with the ball that no other player could. Garrincha was more of a danger than Pele. He believed that at the time he was a phenomenon, capable of sheer magic. Final slide.